So we are continuing with this second part uh, of chapter one. So we're going to cover viruses, which is a very familiar class of malware. Many of you have seen movies where viruses are mentioned. Certainly very popular in the pop culture. So basically, a virus is a type of non-self-replicating software entity which has to attach itself to a host file in order for it to run. So it's very similar to the biological virus in that it is parasitic in nature, meaning it does not have any powers of reproduction. In fact, there's a very big debate about the biological virus, whether it should be classed as living or non-living entity. And I think the general consensus now is that these are not really living entities; they are really just strands of DNA. So in a very similar way, um, the computer virus requires is really just a bit of logic that has got to run inside and another program has to run inside a host program. So the threat of viruses has been exaggerated a bit because of the pop culture and the powers of the biological virus. Actually, the more deadly threat is the worm, but of course, even viruses could cause some havoc. Uh, the reason for that is that viruses are not really portable. That is, it's very difficult to get a Windows virus and have it operate in a Linux system. Actually, it's not possible because the virus, because of the requirement to run within another file, it means it has got to be customized for the particular hardware and software platform of the target system. Um, so this means, for instance, that a Windows virus or Win32 will not necessarily work in a Windows 64-bit system. And furthermore, obviously, a virus for one version of Linux will not run in another version of Linux. So as a result of that, particularly for those who want to create a huge amount of damage, you'll find that for the more well-known general viruses, many of them do target the Windows/IBM uh, uh, platform because this is very widespread, particularly for more poorly uh, protected systems on client machines. So most viruses are actually created for this platform. Of course, there are situations where viruses are created for instance, for Linux systems. It will be difficult because there's over 100 different flavors of Linux, and a virus that is meant for one flavor will not very easily operate in another for another flavor. But for instance, if it's a situation of say Israel Mossad attacking the Iran's nuclear uh, infrastructure, then there's probably a huge payoff in such a situation, and you'd find that the hacker is willing to create a virus just to target that particular system. Um, so similar to biological viruses, you find that computer viruses do have a virus life cycle, which begins of reproduction when the virus uh, replicates itself within an infected machine and attaches itself to an uninfected file. This is a bit out of order. I'll tell you why in a bit. And then, of course, there's a transmission phase. Usually, like we say, because the virus does not have any reproductive powers of its own, it requires some user kind of intervention for it to actually move from device to device. A worm could probably do this by simply going over the network and transmitting itself or copies of itself. But a virus would require some kind of user interaction, usually by moving external storage or opening an email or something, or forwarding those forwards that you see on WhatsApp, where people tell you to share a message to as many people as possible and then go to heaven or something like that. So that's how transmission usually occurs for viruses. Then infection is when a virus attempts to infiltrate, when it infiltrates a program for the first time. Usually, it would have had to attach itself to the program, or to then once this program is loaded into memory. Once this program is loaded into memory, then it can then move freely to another, to other applications that interact with the program or files that interact with that particular file or program. Then you have the actuation phase, where the virus has over multiplied in the target system, and has begun to manifest in terms of uh, uh, poor system performance. So a virus could behave like many of these things, like a worm, like a Trojan, or a logic bomb. Uh, then finally, let's look at types of viruses. You have several types of viruses depending on how they behave or the systems they attack. You can have what they call a macrovirus, which attacks macros, which are really small, tiny Windows programs within programs. There's what you call a boot sector virus, which is a virus which attacks the boot sector, the master boot record. So this one will affect the boot of a system. Usually, sometimes it's what is going on if you find a machine cannot boot. You find situations where you try to boot into a machine, but it refuses to go beyond the boot. So in some cases, the boot sector could have been infected by the virus. Then you have a polymorphic virus, which has multiple virus signatures. A virus signature is basically a sequence of code that enables an antivirus program to detect that a particular piece of code is a virus. So a polymorphic virus will have different virus signatures specifically to confuse the antivirus program. Then you can have what you call a multipartite virus, which is capable of operating in several ways. It could operate as a boot sector virus, for instance, as a macro virus, and so on and so forth. Of course, if it's multipartite, it's likely that this is going to increase its signature. It's going to become bigger in terms of size, which could make it easier maybe to detect. Then you have what you call a direct action virus. This would require direct interaction with infected files to deliver a payload, or otherwise it's going to remain vacant. I'd like to say that most of them are going to be direct action viruses, at least particularly at the infection phase. Then a resident virus is not really a type, but this is what you call a virus once it has been loaded into memory. For it to become active, it has to actually be loaded into memory. How? By you opening an infected file or opening the infected document. The additional types, there's something called a retrovirus, for instance, which is a type of virus which will attack antivirus programs, very similar to a human retrovirus such as HIV, and so on and so forth. So these are the types that you could think of. So this ends chapter 1, and yeah, in a few days I'll be sending you chapter 2.